Welcome, everyone. This is it's still February, right? This is the February edition of the Vancouver Modern Excel and Power BI User Group meetup here, and we are in the Power BI track. Super excited to say that we've got Gašper Kamenšek here with us, all the way live from Slovenia. That's going to be doing our presentation for us tonight. But before we do that, let's go run through all of our standard stuff that we usually let you guys know about. So. Once again, the cover slide, here we are. It's February 2018, or February 18th, rather, 2021. It's late at night for Ken because, it is 10 o'clock on the west coast of Canada. But I should keep on meaning to put that slide up front. So we've been chatting for a little while here, just briefly. We're now into the welcome and overview in about 4 minutes or so, or less, depending on where we go. Joseph will kick off our What's New in Power BI presentation for us to tell us what's new in Power BI over the last month. And then, boy, this is the original time zone slots here. So add 4 hours to this, or 5 hours to this, however that goes. 4 hours. Boy, oh boy. I'm not really good at the shifting time zones here. I'm going to have to actually make this thing going up here. We'll kick into our feature presentation around 20 after, and then we'll let Gašper talk for as long as he wants on this topic about Power Query steps or variables, whatever we have here. So. I do want to say a big thanks for all of the sponsors that we have here. I see Joseph's just putting into the comments, holy cow, we got 4 hours. So thanks to Usergroup for sponsoring, and SkillWave, where you can go and find some great business intelligence training. Microsoft for kicking in, helping us out, and I also want to just throw in a plug here for Monkey Tools, which is the Excel add-in that I've built to try and make Excel and Power BI modeling a little bit easier for working with things like Power Query and Power Pivot and also Power BI. And if you're interested in checking any of those things out, you can find links on our slide decks. Our next meetup for our Excel track is going to be on Thursday, March 4th. This will be at our regularly scheduled time of 6 p.m. on the West Coast. Far too early for Gašper to attend, but for those of us on the West Coast and even on the East Coast of North America, we're back to normal. We have K.R. Patel and Sudhi Ramamurthy coming from the Excel team. These guys are going to be talking to us about the new programming language which is all in JavaScript and working with Office add-ins. So this is going to be a look at the modern Excel world of where we're going with code, some alternatives to VBA and things like that. So this should be really kind of an interesting session coming up. Our next Power BI and Excel track, we're super excited to announce that we've got Imke Feldman joining from Germany. Once again, this is going to be a 10 p.m. start on the West Coast. Hopefully I'll have my schedule put into the proper time zone by that point. And Imke is going to be leading off with a new talk of hers on mastering recursions with list.generate and list.accumulate in Power Query. So pretty stoked to see what Imke's got up her sleeve here. It's going to be awesome. And Gašper, you can be up for this one. That'd be great. Once again, I know we sent out an email to everybody in the user group, but if you have the time to fill out the Excel user group survey, the Excel team would love to hear from you. So if you haven't done that yet, please do. The link is in the slide deck, which is available for download. The other thing that I want to mention here quickly as well is that we are looking for help for our April 22nd meetup. And the reason for this is because Joseph is actually going to be our presenter on the April 22nd meetup for the feature presentation. So we thought that it would only be fair to actually not make Joseph go and lead off the what's new in Power BI and have to do the whole feature presentation as well. So if there's anybody out there who would like to do the 15-20-minute segment on what's new and try your hand at a short speech for the user group on what's new, talk about your favorite topics in that, we would love to have you. Just drop Rebecca a note here. We will be sending out an email to the group as well to try and get some interest for this. Joseph will tell you it's lots of fun to do and whatnot, but as I say, if he's going to be focusing on the feature presentation, we'd like to give him a break on that particular part. So. The last thing, if you're looking to get involved and lead a full presentation for a full session, we again would love to hear from you. You can fill out the survey listed here at excelguru.ca/speak@vanpug, and then we'll get in contact with you and get you scheduled to get onto this platform as well. I know we're right now booking out into the summer, so we've got lots of time to practice things and get things going. But we're always excited to welcome new people to our meeting group here. We love hearing different voices as to what's going on. All right, now on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the floor over to Joseph now, because it is time for the What's New in Power BI. Joseph, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let me stop sharing of my screen here. We'll turn it over to you.
And yeah, I am just taking over. Oh, there we go. All right. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, we're all good. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Ken, for the introduction. And welcome everybody. Yeah, little later than usual on the West Coast, but yeah, very excited to get started and do something a little bit different this week. So just before we jump into what's new in Power BI, just going to do a little bit of the standard introduction. So as Ken said, my name is Joseph. I've done the what's new in Power BI, sort of the intro portion for the meetup groups, probably over a year now. I've presented a few times at the meetup groups over the last few years as well for the full presentation. And as Ken mentioned, we'll be doing the same thing in April. In my day job, I'm a data analyst at a financial institution in beautiful North Vancouver, where I model, manipulate, analyze, visualize data in Power Query and Excel, and Power BI, SQL Server, and R Studio as well. My website is feathersanalytics.com, where I blog about really all things Power BI and blog a little bit about R as well. But really my passion is how we can bring the power of those two things together and bring some advanced analytics into Power BI to make them more accessible, really to a wider range of audience. Just underneath there, I've also included my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn profile. So please feel free to reach out. I love chatting data stuff. I love connecting with the wider data community. And what's great about doing the meetups virtually now is we get to connect and chat with people from all over the world. So as I say, would love to connect. And if you have any questions from some of the material that I'm going to be going through, please feel free to reach out. So with that, why don't we jump into what's new in Power BI for this month? And the answer is we haven't had a desktop release yet for 2021. But we have had some feature releases for the Power BI report server in January. And as usual for the Power BI report server releases, usually this just brings the report server up to par with the monthly desktop releases and some of the functionality that's available in the desktop application, as well as powerbi.com or Power BI Online. So we're getting things like the visual zoom slider, which I reviewed a couple meetups ago, the apply all filters, etc. If you want to learn more about the report server and some of the new features as of this January, there's a blog post as usual on the Microsoft site as well. We also had the release of the paginated reports update in January as well, new release of the Power BI report builder. And again, if you want to learn a little bit more about this, there's a blog post available as a resource as well. One of the final features that has been released just at the end of January as well, one thing I think is really cool is the step folding indicators in Power Query Online. So what this does is within Power Query itself, when we're connecting to data sources like SQL Server or Azure servers, when we're writing our Power Query applied steps and we're building those steps to build sort of our little ETL pipeline, when we're connecting data and we're transforming it and we're doing our data prep, when we're connecting to like a database as an example, some of those transformation steps can actually be pushed back to the server, done on the server side, rather than locally within our within Power BI or within Excel or wherever we're using Power Query. And it was always a great feature. If you don't know about it, I would definitely recommend reading up about it. There was not really a clear way to know when we were leveraging the power of query folding, though. we sort of have to like right click on the applied step and see if view native query, if we're able to connect on that, then we could see that, okay, query folding is active. Now we actually get a little icon next to the step, and there's a little legend down here as well that we can see is query folding active. We get the nice little green icon. If it's not folding, it's red, and then some opaque unknown, and maybe it folds, maybe not. So I think this, as always, this is in preview at the moment. It gets iterated on, will be better and better every month. But if you do use query folding and you are connecting to some of these data sources, would definitely recommend checking this out as well. What I'm going to spend the rest of sort of the next 10 minutes or so on is actually, I'm just going to review a little bit of a technique that I've written 2 blog posts about the last week, filter by cluster in Power BI, up here in feathersanalytics.com. We have part 1 and part 2. I split it into 2 parts because it is a little bit of a bigger example. And this is the same thing that I covered for anyone who was at our beginning of December or end of November, I can't remember which, meetup group. I covered sort of the beginning of this technique, but I'm just going to finish it off to show how we can write a DAX measure to sort of finish this pattern. So the scenario that we're facing in Power BI is we have a dashboard right now. It's built just on a single table data model. So we have a product category. We have a product, so there can be many products within a product category. We have the location of these products, and then we have 3 numeric columns. We have revenue, cost, and income. So I've written a measure for just summing each of those. And so I'm bringing some basic information into the report. We can see the product category, the income by location, the cost by location, and then I've started to build a scatter chart on the right-hand side. And so how we've built this report is we always want this to be analyzed. We always want this report to be filtered down just to a single product. So if I go to the filter pane on the right-hand side, if I click on like full zip, so that's a hoodie, casual shoes or casual shirt, we're always only going to return 1 product at a time. But what I want to add to this report is when I select casual shirt, for example, we can see that product is a casual shirt. The product category is shirts. And in my scatter chart, I want to return all of the other products that fall within the product category, so we can do a comparison of the product that we select to similar products within the same product category. So how can we do this? If I open up the Power Query editor, I've actually pre-made some tables, but what we're going to do, we're going to abstract out, and we're going to build some dimension models off of our fact table. So I'm just going to enable load for these. And all I've done is I've referenced our initial table here, our fact table. And I'm just creating a category table. This is going to act as a bit of a bridge table in our data model. And I just want to return a distinct list of the product categories. I'm going to build a product filter table. So this is going to power the filtering on our report. And this is bringing in both the product category and the each unique product. So this is at the product granularity. So we have 21 distinct products, each with their associated product category. And this doesn't impact our solution really, but just for best practices to make a true star schema, bringing out a location dimension as well. So this is the 3 unique locations that we have. I'm going to enable load for this as well. I'm going to close and load that. It should load pretty quickly because my data source is just a single Excel file. And then I'm going to have an additional 3 tables in my data model here. So when I click on my data model view, it's just thinking, there we go. When I click on my data model view, it's actually already built some of the relationships for me. So we have location has a one-to-many relationship, so our fact, that's looking good. I can hide that in the report view. Product categories go into product category. That's perfect as well. And then we do have a product category to product category here. Now, this is pretty good. However, what I actually want product filter to be able to filter through all the way to our fact table. So although this is a one-to-many relationship, if I double click on the relationship, I'm going to change this cross filter direction to both. So now I do have a way that when I select my product filter, this product filter table is connected to the category table via the product category field. And this category bridge table is connected to my fact table also via the product category field. So now when I select a product, it's actually filtering our fact table via product category. So then it's going to return all of the products within that product category. So if I duplicate the page just to show what I mean, if from my new product filter, I now drop this into the filters on the page and clear my original one. If I hit athletic fit now in the product, from the product filter dimension, rather than just returning one product as was happening previously in the first version of the report here, like when I said athletic fit, only athletic fit was being returned. Now athletic fit, all the products are being returned as well. Now the only issue with this is, unfortunately, this has also changed these two column charts over here, and this isn't the behavior that I want. For these two column charts, I do want these just to return the specific product information for athletic fit, but we can see that this has changed to return all of the products within that category. So I need to do something a little bit more. I need to do just one more step. So to do that, I need to create one more relationship between my product filter and my product fact table. Instead of connecting by product via the bridge table, I'm just going to do another relationship directly here. So it does create the relationship between product and product, but it creates it with a dotted line. And the reason for this is because right now this is an inactive relationship between these two tables. It's inactive because we already have a relationship between product and our fact table via this link here, via the category table. And we can't have two active relationships between two tables at the same time within our data model. If I double click here, we can see that make this relationship active. This box is unchecked, but it still is single direction, many-to-one relationship. So that's all good. So although this isn't sort of active by default, we can actually leverage this within our report to return the information that we're looking for. And to do that, I'm going to write a new DAX measure. So I'm going to do a new total income measure. So I'm just going to say new measure. And how I can use this relationship is I'm going to say total income just for a product though. I'm going to wrap a calculate function around my total income measure. And I'm going to use a function called use relationship. And what this lets us do is explicitly define which relationship between two tables we want to use to provide that filtered context for our measure. So rather than relying on just the active measure that's in our data model, I can override that and say, no, I actually want to use my product fact product from there, and I want to use my product filter field like that. So now when I commit that, if I drop this total income into the visual here, and I'm going to change that to a clustered column chart, and let's make the formatting a little bit nicer as well. We can see now that this total income via the new product measure that I created of 793,000 matches the values that I had initially as well for Canada, France, and Germany. But I'm also getting the added context of the comparison of all products within the product category. And I could actually leave this as well. We can have total income for the entire product category, as well as total income just for that product. So then when I filter through here, we can see how that product contributes to the overall product category for any given product. If I go down here, so it's, well, 10:20 exactly, even at this time of night, still right on the money. So thank you everyone for giving me the time for this introduction. If you're interested in any of the technique that I went over today, I know I went through it pretty quickly. But as I said, it is, I have written two posts about it. So if you go to feathersanalytics.com, I actually outline the exact method I did down here in the bottom of the part 2 post. And I've actually covered how you can achieve the exact same functionality in a slightly different way, just building out a slightly different data model without needing to build that custom DAX statement. So thank you, everyone. Again, please feel free to connect. I'm really looking forward to the feature presentation tonight by Gašper. So over to Ken, back to Gašper to kick off.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joseph. Appreciate that. Here, Gašper, before you get started here, Christian texted me a picture, and I thought I'd just share that really quickly here. Dude, this is the last time we were on stage together, apparently.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it seems like a while ago, doesn't it? So,
it does, and you even gave out your hand over there.
Yeah,
which is not always the case, right?
You're still bitter, aren't you? That I completely missed you on one of those.
You left me hanging, man. That's just not done.
Yeah. Well, it was an accident. All right, buddy. Why don't you take the screen over here? So I'm super excited to have Gašper with us all the way from Slovenia, folks. The two of us usually get to play some fun and games on stage in Bulgaria when we get to present together, which is a heck of a lot of fun. We really missed it this last year, but the next best thing is where I get to actually have Gašper come and present to our group. So you're probably going to introduce yourself, I assume. I'm not going to steal your thunder because I know everybody steals your joke that you usually use now. I'm not going to do that. So welcome to our group, buddy. It's all yours.
Thanks, man. Thank you. Okay, so first off, since this is locally on both sides a very inconvenient time, I just want to thank everyone for either staying awake or just waking up for this. And for everyone in between, welcome to the session. And so this will be a session about thinking about Power Query steps as variables, which is exactly how you should be thinking about them. And it will just sort of be a deep dive through, I think it will be 3 demos in the end, just showing you how you can utilize that thinking of Power Query steps as variables to do some, amazing stuff. It will be a sort of a mashup of different things I've done for different sessions for different user groups in about, let's say, the last year. Just kind of focusing on using those variables or steps as variables. So before I go into that, my name is Gašper Kamenšek, and the joke that Ken was talking about is I come from the only country in the world that has the word love in the name. So that was the joke. I hope you all had a great laugh. It's not really a joke, it's just a fun fact. And I do a lot of speaking at conference, so the pictures that Ken was showing, those came from Bulgaria, and that is the fun conference each year. And for the last two happenings of that, Ken and I did a session together, and that was really a lot of fun. Okay, so without further ado, this will all be demos, which is usually the way I do things. I have to admit, since it's early hours, I actually did prepare, in case everything goes wrong, files this time, which I never do, but this time I have them. So either way, you're going to see the end result, but hopefully we can actually achieve it. So thinking about variables is something that, if you're using Excel, you're pretty much used to. You're not really thinking about it, but you're doing it all the time if you're using Excel. And Power Query with its M language really has a few things that are kind of interesting, or just, if I try to write a for loop in Power Query, and I sort of think that that's where MK is going with the next session, or a while loop at least. It's not easy. It's not a given. It's not as if you know, you're using VBA, let's say, right, where you just say for something, you know, equals 1 2, let's say 100, and then just keep on doing that. Just next I or a or whatever you name your variables, and that is not something you can just so easily do in Power Query because of its structure, because of the way it works actually. And imagine an infinite loop in Power Query. That would be fun. To have a modal window that you can't close, but you know, it would be fun. So let's just first try to sort of bring in the perspective of variables as you all know them. But I just so this was a last minute addition, but I just thought it would be fun if we actually started with this. So I have this sheet, it's called dates, and if I put like 100 in here, let's go into something that is, I guess, never seen in Power BI sessions. And for all of those that are, you know, kind of new to the game, this is called the VBA editor in Excel. It was like the first place where you could do really cool stuff in Excel before Power Query came along, before Power Pivot was even a thing and all that. And let's just do this. Let's just say I'm going to do a new module. I'm going to call it, so it will be a sub test, and so it's a subroutine, and I'm just going to do a, let's declare a variable, right? This is the way kind of, you know, the way that all programming languages think, right? You have to declare a variable, and then you can say, well, this variable is actually, and let's just say it's on sheet dates. I have, I really hope I remember this correctly, but we can just look at it if nothing will happen. So it's whatever is in range A5 or in cell A5 on sheet that I call dates in the current workbook. And then let's just see if we actually got something. So let's say, let's just bring that A out to see what happens. So if I now go gradually through this, there you go. So it declared a variable A, and then it stored something in that variable, and now I can use it, right? Now I can show it to you because it's stored somewhere. And now I can do, you know, stuff like A equals A plus 1, which I guess is always the go-to thing. And if I show this one, now it's 101 and all that, right? So this is the way we think about variables in programming language. We just store something, and then because it's stored, we can kind of fiddle with it, right? We can say, okay, now I got this stored, now I can do this whole bunch of other stuff, and then I can reuse whatever I stored as that variable. Now in Excel, it's kind of different because this 100 is stored. But what is it being stored as in Excel? Well, the way we think about it, it's actually being stored as A5. That's the name of it. Or sometimes you'll even have, I'm going to call this something. I'm going to call this a number. And now I can say equals number, right? And that's the variable that now says 100. So in Excel, we're always using variables. We're always using variables. We're just not thinking about it in that way, because we're just doing, you know, equals this. But lately with the let function and the lambdas, Excel is becoming, you know, even within the grid, it's becoming a full-blown programming language. And having said that, the variables, you know, with the let function are much more obvious, although just the same as doing whatever you got in your let portion of the formula in a single cell. It's kind of the same thing. You store it so you can reuse it. Only in that scenario with the let function, you're just storing that within the formula or the function that you're writing. Okay, and now let's go to the Power Query part, right? So Power Query, and let's just shoot off a, you know, the simplest of them all, a blank query like this. And if I was to say this, so now I got a blank query, so I got nothing, right? And now I say, well, equals 100. So I'm going to kind of simulate the A thing that we did over there, right? So obviously 100 is stored somewhere now, but where is it stored? Well, it turns out it's stored over here. And this is the fancy name, which is always the first name you're going to see as far as steps are concerned in Power Query. This is the fancy name that this variable actually has, because I can do now, give me a new step, equals source plus 1. And there it is. So now I got a new variable, right? The value is 101. And where is that one stored? Well, that one is stored over here. And now I could do, now give me a new step. And this one is actually the custom one variable plus, or I call source. And if I would spell that correctly, like this. This is now 201, right? So I took this variable and just put them together. And even this is now a variable. It's a variable that is stored as custom 2, and I can reuse it. Right? So this is the way I like to think about steps in Power Query. And thinking about them this way allows you to do a lot of very interesting things. And let's just shoot off one of those very interesting things. And let's go back to, let's just discard this one. It's a blank one anyway. And let's start off with this table. All right, let's start off with this table. And let's say, you know, sometimes I'm going to use this table and sometimes I'm going to use this table. Right? It's kind of an interesting thing. And this one is called actual versus plan 4, and this one is called actual versus plan. That's it. All right. So let's start by just allowing ourselves to have this scenario where sometimes we return this and sometimes we return this as, or actually just switch between two inputs. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to go, and this will kind of be a sad story because I'm going to go into blank query again. So I could have just reused that one. And I'm going to go with Excel, current workbook. It is. Hate it when that happens. And I have these 3 items, right? The number is the name that I assigned to the cell, if you remember, to the 100 cell. So that's the named range, and these 2 are tables. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just say that it needs to begin with actual, go like this, and I don't really need the content. I'm just going to use this, and I'm going to load this to a new worksheet like this. And then I'm going to do the oldie goldie. I'm going to say, bring me a data validation list, just using, these. Now, the reason I'm doing this is so I can actually select which one I'm using, right? Or which one I want to be, I want it to be utilized, or I want it to be used. So this is either one of those, right? And now I need to somehow get this piece of data into Power Query. Now, again, I'm just going to use the named range. So I'm going to call this selection and go back to Power Query. I'm going to more or less just duplicate this query because it's already got the things that I need. And I just want this selection, right? This is the one I want. And without this. And now I need to kind of get into this value. And this is where things get interesting, right? Again, we're thinking about variables, and from the Excel perspective, variables are usually, they can be multiple things. They can sort of be even tables, columns, or columns or ranges, I should say, or just single cells. And in Power Query, what seems to be interesting is usually the idea in Power Query is it's either a table or it's a column. Now it can be a list, but it's never a cell. You're not thinking about Power Query as cells, right? If I look at this, these are not A1 and A2, and you can't even reference them by those names. But you could essentially do this. You could say, well, I'm just going to drill down into this, and I will get this as a sort of, as the, let's say, variable now, or as a value of this query, and as the final output of this query at this point. So this is the selected table, right? And it's tied directly to the drop down menu in my Excel. But now I can use this, right? Now I can go back to this one, just change it a bit. And, or actually, let's do it differently. Let's say I'm gonna close and load, and I won't load the selection. And then I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say, just give me this table. And I want you to do nothing with it. So don't even change the type, and just load it back into my Excel. But now I'm going to change it a bit. Now I'm going to say, okay, so the source step of this says it's in the current workbook, and the name of the object that you're using is this, right? But what I'm going to say is, no, the name of the object you're using will be selected table, right? Now it appears to be the same thing. So if I do this, but there's something I can do now. I can change this, go here, refresh. Oh, I see what I did. Let's go into Advanced Editor. It was just that I changed there it is. This one should not be there. So let's refresh that, close and apply. There it is. So I thought I actually deleted that one, but so I now have kind of a variable, right? And the funny thing I could do is I could actually reuse it within the same query, right? It says source is this, but I could also do let's go into my Excel current workbook. And let's give me that value. Now I could go into my selection, again, deleting those two, and just drill down into this. You see, now I don't even need this query because I did it all in the same query. But the interesting thing is this one query is now pulling from two different sources. Well, technically it's one source, it's the current workbook, but from two different places within the workbook. So it's saying this is a table, whereas this is me saying, now forget about this table for a while and just go, you know, drill into it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these. And I'm going to do another kind of interesting thing with this table. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to do a reference to this, or not even a reference. I'm just going to duplicate it. So I'm going to duplicate this one. And within the duplicate, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep top rows with a fabulous number of 0. And then I'm going to use the header as first row, which is not usually the way you do it, but I'm going to use the header as first row, and then I'm going to transpose it. So all that this does is it gives me the list of my columns, right? So I started off with the whole table, and now I went in here and I got a list of columns. Now the funny thing that I want to do is I only want those columns that got the actuals in it. I don't want the comparison to plan. So I just want the actuals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, this is going to be a text filter and it's going to be an ends with. So, oh, funny thing there. Let me cancel that one. Let me bring this here. You did that too. So this sometimes happens to me when I'm doing Teams. And I think it's something to do with the screen's zoom or something. Haven't figured it out yet. So what I want to do is I want to filter this, and I'm just going to do it kind of the old-fashioned way. So I'm going to say this, and this. So those are the ones that I want. Okay. And now I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a list. So change this into a list. And the interesting thing here is now I have two things. I have my table within this query, and then I also have my list within this query. And my table at this point is called source, whereas my list is over here, right? And these can be viewed as two variables. I can now rename this, and I'll just call selected columns. And this is another thing that you should be very mindful of. You see, the names of applied steps, sometimes they'll have spaces and sometimes they will not have spaces. Now, when they do have spaces, when you want to reference them, you will have to reference them not just by, the name itself, but you will need to add a couple of additions to that, right? And that's just because of the space. So whenever you're renaming your steps, and usually you rename steps because you want either your code to be easily readable, or because you want to kind of mark some result of the query, just partial result, as a variable. And this is exactly what I did here, right? So I got my source over here, and that is my table, and it's stored as a source. And then I have my selected columns over here, and those are stored as selected columns. And now I can go new step, and let's go back to my source. This is very kind of programming language thinking. I did what I wanted with my data set, and I derived a variable from it, which is called selected columns, right? But now I go back to my source, and now I'm going to try to use that variable. And the way I'm going to use it is I'm just going to do something like this. I'm going to say, so give me this free and remove all other columns, right? And what this does is, in the code part of it, it creates something like this. And what this is well, basically, it's a list of columns that are to remain standing after you do this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, this is a list. I have a list somewhere. It's called selected columns. So let's just use it, right? Let's go like this. And there it is. All right, so within a single query, I used two variables, a table, and then a list of columns. And this is where they both kind of culminated together, right? I used them both within a single. So first I called my source, and then I said, well, just do this. Now I could kind of drop this step, and within the final step, just say use the source instead of using that extra step just to reference the source. But regardless, this is a very interesting kind of thinking, because in the first part where we said blank query, and then we said, let's have a variable, let's say it's 100. That was a very simple variable, as was this one. You know, this is just a variable that is actually stored as a query result, right? But over here, I use over here, I use the same variable, but I used it as a storing not only a single value, but a whole table, or over here, storing a list of values. And this is where things get very interesting, because you can store different things as steps and then reuse them. Now, let's say the most common use of this, of storing variables that you're going to see, will definitely be a, kind of creating a custom calendar, either in Power BI or in Power Query. So either in Excel or in Power BI, using Power Query both times, and just, doing a simple kind of, let's say this, let's turn this into dates, and let's just turn these into values. Let's bring this into a table. And I'm sure you've seen this before. So you go, let's reference this. Let's bring this into a single date. And then let's do this. So at this point, you're seeing Slovenian dates, which are normal. So it's day, month, year. It's not like some people do it. So like this. And then I usually do this. I go, just because, to create a calendar, the only piece of information that I really need is which years are present. So I would go just turn this into start of years and then remove all duplicates. I could also sort this, but it wouldn't really make a difference. And then I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this one date 2. Now there are different techniques. I'm sure Ken would have a different way of tackling this. I actually think he does have a different way of tackling this because I saw it once. But it doesn't matter because what I want to portray here is more or less a simple use of variables within building this calendar. So here's what I would actually want to, as a result of this, I would want a list of dates starting with this date, so the smallest one in the first column, to the largest one in the second column. Right? That's what my calendar is. It's a list of dates, and all dates need to be present. And how do I do this? Well, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to turn these into numbers. And then, just to show you, because you could do this much easier if you just do some custom typing, but I'm going to call this, let's call this base. And then I'm going to take the first column and I'm going to say, well, the only thing I want from this one is the minimum. And I hope I didn't lose you over here where I turned the dates into numbers, right? That's an Excel thing. It's what you can do in Excel. It's what you can do anywhere within, of course, the Power Query realm. Okay, so this one, I just want the minimum. So I'm going to transform this into the minimum of it. And this I'm going to call min date. Right? And now that I did this, that I stored my variable, I'm going to go back to my base. Now I'm going to take the second column, I'm going to transform, I'm going to go, and now I want the maximum. And this I'm going to call max date. Right, at this point, I already have, well, I have as much variables as I have steps. But the ones that are really interesting to me are this, this, and this. Now, this one I no longer need, but I did need it over here because I needed to recall it. But now I have my min date and I have my max date. And now I can simply say, let's do a new step, a custom step, which will be start with my min date and go all the way to my max date, like this. And this is it. So if I turn this into a table, I call it date, and then actually turn it into a date. This is exactly what I need, right? And this is the most basic example of how you can use variables within your, or how you should think of your steps as variables, because that's exactly what I did here. So I stored my min date, I stored my max date as two variables, and then within this step, which was the key step, I used them both. So I said from this variable to this variable, and they are variables, right? They can vary resulting from the dates that I have in my original table. If this dates would be starting, let's just do one, and let's say this one is 2010. If I refresh this one now, it would go back to 2010. That's the idea, right? But using variables. Okay, and now let's do a funny one. Let's do this one. So this is a kind of an interesting example, which is, well, it's part of the session that I will be doing in about 2 weeks' time. And it's kind of simulating fuzzy matching, right? Because fuzzy matching is brilliant. If you use Power Query joins, you really should know how to use fuzzy matching, because it's such a strong tool to have in your tool belt. But this example is interesting because it will be more than fuzzy matching. It will kind of be similar to fuzzy matching, in a sense that fuzzy matching, you can say that it can look at partial similarities. So if only parts of the text are the same, then it kind of says those two could be the same thing. But having done that, you really need to fiddle around with the percentage of, kind of likeness that is needed for fuzzy matching to point to two values as being the same. But over here we have something different, and I'm just gonna tell you what it is, and then I'm gonna tell you how I want you to think about it. And it's exactly how I thought about it doing this for the first time. So we have some submissions, and these submissions are actually just people writing into, let's say a form for, let's say a travel agency that just pushed out a form and said, look, if you traveled with us, please write to us what you loved, which cities, were closest to your heart in the end. What did you like? What did you dislike? And the point is, this is in a shape of multiple sentences, right? It's a whole segment of, just words. But what we want to derive from it is if any of these locations were used. Now, the problem is, and this is just could be a very simple problem because these locations could be used in different languages. Like over here, we have the English version, the Italian version, and the Slovenian version, or they could also be used just, by different, like I loved Romans, right, as people, and Romans as such would also imply Rome, right? So if I would do Romans over here, that will also be a way to, for people to reference Rome. And what I want here is this is a kind of a translation table, but not a translation table in the sense of, well, and sort of it is a translation table in the sense of fuzzy matching, but it's not really searching for the whole thing. It's just kind of saying, look, if somebody uses this, and you can see it over here, right? If somebody uses this, that means they were in New York, right? And what we want to do is we just want to take both of these and kind of say, okay, now, if any of this is used, I want for you to show that these people were in any of these. So I would like to take this and then add 5 columns to it. And for each of those columns, I just want it to be either 1 or a 0, or actually 1 or a blank. And it should have a 1 if that city was mentioned within these reviews. And the way you should be thinking about this, and this is derived from where I was kind of using it for my work, is if you have products, but you don't really have let's say you're talking about cars, right? Now, a description of cars will include multiple things. It will include, is it gas or is it diesel? Is it an electric car? Is it a caravan, or is it, it will have all those things in there, but it will have them in this kind of form. But now offering this product or having this product represented in a table, what I would need is a columns that would say, diesel yes, no, or a minivan yes, no. So kind of bringing a product down to the set of values that belong to that product. And it's kind of difficult to search for those things within the content of the description. And that's what this does, right? Because it can be used in multiple ways. So let's do this. Let's just go from table range. And we will call this, we don't need to change the type. So we will call this source, or actually let's just do another reference to it. And we will rename this as, I'll call this lookup table, although, you know, it could also be called anything else. And let's actually change it up a bit. Let's say these are the names, and these are sort of similar names that could be used. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpivot. I'm going to remove this one, and I'm going to call this my lookup table. And then I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, well, okay, this was fun. Now I want a different part of my Excel. And the different part of my Excel that I want is the other table, and that is, I think, called submissions. So let's just see if it is. Give me from current Excel. This. And it is. Okay. So these are the submissions that were submitted by through the form. And now I'm going to call this like this. Okay. And now I have two variables, right? I have my lookup table and I have my submissions. And now what I would want is, next to submissions, I would need Rome, Paris, or London, and all that. So all of these just as their own columns, and then a 1 or a blank if it's used or if it's not used. And the way we're going to do this is we're actually going to use, and since that one didn't work, let's see if it will work now. I'm just going to say add column, custom column. There it is. Okay, and what we're going to use is this. We're going to use a table select rows. And what we're going to try to do is say, well, start with this, but then I want you to select only those rows from the lookup table that contain the partial or the names of the cities which partial matches you would have found within this context. And that will be something like this. So I want you to start with the lookup table. And lookup table, I think that's okay. And then I want you to create a function from this lookup table. So I want you to start with a lookup table and then go into text.contains, right? Text.contains, that's the gist of it, because you can't be looking at total matches. It needs to be contained. If it contains any of those keywords, then I want you to bring it up. And so the text that I'm looking for is in a column called submissions. And the part that I want to return is value, like this. So the lookup table is just, you should think of this as a variable again, right? It's just that I gave it a name here because it's going to use this as that variable. Okay, and This says token, comma, expected. I need another parenthesis. And this should be like this. So there it is. Okay. And what I got from this is I got a table from it, right? And what does this table contain? Well, from the first one, I got Rome and Paris, right? From the second one, I got just Rome. From the third one, I got Rome and New York. And here I got New York and Ljubljana. And over here, I got New York and London. And now I could do, well, bring out this, the names, and then just add a column, which will be a simple 1. And then what I want you to do is to pivot this column by using the custom and let's say we do a sum, it doesn't really matter, like this. And this is it, right? So here I have everyone that said they were in Rome, everyone that mentioned Paris, everyone that mentioned New York, right? And this is such a, you know, first of all, this is a very, very kind of a let's say level 400 kind of thing to do, but in a single query. So we just said, first, take my lookup table and, you know, just kind of put it into the format that I need and then call it a lookup table. So that's this. And then I want you to take the submissions and save those as submissions. So I have 2 variables here, and they're actually 2 tables. And then a single column where I'm using these, both variables. Go. And this one's not really the variable that you saw, but it was a just a column reference over here. Using them to call a function that does kind of crazy stuff, right? It goes through it and looks for partial matches, looks for fuzzy matching, so to speak, but, you know, written in your own way. And the good thing about it is, if I went back over here, and let's just let this one load. And if I now said, I'm going to add something, Roma, Bella, Roma, and then I'm going to say, Ljubljana is a, or actually let's call this like this. This would be kind of a reference to the girls in Ljubljana, so it's called Ljubljančanke, that's the female population of Ljubljana, are very beautiful. But the funny thing about this is, go, not fly, like this. Now, the funny thing about it is this one now references Ljubljana, right? But it references it in a way that I don't have written anywhere here. And the only thing I need to do is to say this. So this is also a way that Ljubljana could be referenced. Right? And now this submission, if I go over here and do a, so if I look at it now, this submission, of course, doesn't have Ljubljana because it doesn't have the new text. And if I refresh this, it still doesn't have Ljubljana. That's interesting. Oh, yeah, because I misspelled it. There. Shouldn't really be doing this early. There you go. And now it's there. And this really should be taken as sort of a greatness of what you can do just using the, you know, sort of steps as variables, where you say, well, this is my table, and now I'm going to store it. I'm going to call it this, and now I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to derive a different, value from it, and then come back and bring it out as a new variable, and then combine those two doing this. And let's just do one more thing to the previous example, which I think will also kind of be a cool thing to do. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to take this. I'm going to start with this and just go I only need the actuals, so I'm gonna go this, and this, remove everything else, and then I'm gonna unpivot all the others, and from here I'm only gonna derive whatever is before space, or with other words, I'm gonna extract the year. So text before the limiter, space like this, turn this into a number. And now what I want to do is this, and this will be interesting. For January of 2018, I have a number here, but what I would really want to have shown here is the percentage that this number is of the entire year, right? And how can I do that? Well, we all know how we can do that. We can just do a sum by year and then, bring those two together. But how do I do this over here? Well, basically what you do is this. You say, well, this is where I want to leave this, so I'll call this base. And then I'm going to start with the base. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say group by attribute, which is year in this case. And I want you to do a sum of value. I'm going to call this total year, like this, right? And I'm going to call this my totals. I have my totals over here and I have my base over here. Now, how do I bring those into this? Well, I just do a new step and I do a table dot, let's just do nested join. So table nested join. And say, okay, so I want you to start with the original table, which is called base. And that table has a column that is called attribute. So this should be like this, sorry. And then there's another table, and that one is called totals. Right? And do you see how I'm just referencing steps? Right? But they're my variables, they're my tables. And this one also has something called attribute. And then I want you to add a column, which will be called result. It doesn't really matter what it's called, you know that you're gonna expand it anyway and not use the name. And for the join type, I want you to use left outer. There it is. Right? So for each one of those, so it's the base is now your base table. That's your left table. The totals are now your right table. And for each of the submissions in the base table, I can now bring in the total year like this. And now it's just a matter of adding a column and saying take the value divided by total year. Now I no longer need the total year, and this one should be a percentage. And this also shows you how powerful it is to think about steps as variables that can store, either values, either lists or columns or tables. Because usually when you do join, what do? You do merges from different queries, right? You would say join this with this, and that would make sense. But over here we said, well, I want you to join, and again, even here we did say these two tables, but what? Where is it? Oh, is this one? There it is. We said, I want you to join these two tables, but these two tables were not two queries. They were two steps. They were two variables containing tables. And that's how you should think about, and even, you know, as a solution, this is much cleaner because I don't have two different queries then merged together. It's all a single query. It's all done in a very clean way. And even with the just kind of keeping your queries clean by naming steps, which you should do anyway. You should name your steps. You should actually add comments to them sometimes when you do crazy stuff like we did before. But this forces you to do that because you're naming things as something, you know, sensible, and also as something that doesn't contain spaces, so that you can then later on use them as variables. And I'm hoping that this session really showed you how each step in Power Query is just a variable that can be used in multiple different ways later on, right? You can call on previous steps, and we do that again so often, even with the calendar example, but you just saw that you can go way beyond that. You can go way beyond just having single values and then, you know, creating lists from that. You can have tables doing joins. You can have multiple things. Okay, and this is where I'm gonna kick it back to my PowerPoint and do the Q&A.
Oh, that's perfect timing, isn't it? All right, because I was going to interrupt you with a question, but I felt like you were going to that slide. So there you go. So hey, Gašper, just for reference here, there's a lot of really nice comments coming in about how you've been blowing people's minds and changing the way they're actually thinking about this. So that's very cool. One question that I think is worth calling out on this one here is. C asked, is using these or using your steps as variables, is this better than using functions? What's your opinion on that?
I think it's kind of mixing apples and oranges in a way. Sometimes they can do the same thing, but they're both useful in their own little way. So I wouldn't say this is better. There definitely are situations where functions are the best thing in the world. You know, when you want, let's say, the entire worksheet with the so the entire workbook, and you want to derive, let's say, data from all the worksheets in that workbook, you're going to need functions. There's no way to get through that with just variables. You simply can't. But I know where you come from. So you're coming from the simple example where I sort of created a function on the fly. That one must have stuck with you, searching for partial references, doing the fuzzy matching. Now, doing that is much easier than actually creating a custom function and then using it, because that will always be combining two queries, whereas this was very clean. It was a single step. It also folds better, and it can be faster. You do need table.buffer for that, but it kind of varies. It kind of varies. So what I would say is it's whenever you're doing transformations, so of entire, let's say, sheets or entire tables or entire documents like TXT files, all that, functions are always the way to go, because you can, use your edit window to just edit the function and then see what it does. Whereas if it's all in the single query, you can just get lost in that. And sometimes you want the function to do multiple things. My function was simple. My function just returned a simple list that sort of looked through a text and saw if it can find some matches within it. That's simple. Whereas sometimes your functions will do a lot more. They'll do transformation, they'll do change types, they'll do all that. And to sort of fit all that within a single step, you're just not going to do that. It's not going to be clean, and you're not going to be able to kind of correct that effectively, ever. So the final answer is it depends on the situation, but they both have its little place under the sun.
There you go. Question: do you always rename your queries and your source tables?
Yeah, usually I will. It kind of depends on if something is repeatable or not. So if I'm going to come back to it, then it's always renaming.
That's interesting. For me, I take explicit control over every query name. The only ones I don't rename are when we get into things that are an actual, like the sample transforms or whatever else. I'll rename things before that.
That's what I'm saying. So if it's a single, if I'm just doing it once and I'll never look at it again, I'm not going to bother. But if it's a project, if it's a thing that's going to be reused, then definitely, that's the way to go.
I would say source data tables. If you're talking about Excel tables, absolutely. And I honestly wish that, for me personally, I wish that when you actually created a new query from a Power Query that actually popped you up and asked you for the table names. I hate tables called Table 1. Just evil things. But Solar asks, he said, very cool. The variable step. Now, this is a tough one to answer just because of the way it's phrased. But is it faster on performance? And I guess I think the first question Gašper is going to want to know is faster than what, right? How do you find that this affects the performance on Power Query, Gašper, when you start using lots of steps and start using your variables in this way?
Yeah, it depends.
It's a hard one. It depends, right?
Yeah, it's with Power Query. I love it when even the first presentation was so interesting because it got to this new feature that were the folding icons that Microsoft introduced in data flows, and the folding icons. There was an icon there that must have struck you as, what do you mean you don't know? Or what do you mean you can't tell? Right? It is folding, it's not folding, and then you can't tell. And that all comes down to speed, right? That's having those indicators is actually a pointer to places within your query that you should take a closer look at. You should be thinking about optimizing those. And even those, right, and those were written by Microsoft, do have a certain icon that says you just can't tell. All right. And it's sometimes with this long queries, it's the same thing. You just can't tell if it's gonna be as quick as hell or if it's just gonna drag on, and performance has been an issue.
Oh, always. And there are some tools in Power BI for being able to do timing on some things, but the problem is that they just kick out a huge amount of data, and interpreting it is kind of hard. And the other thing is, because of Power Query's lazy evaluation engine, depending on how the steps are actually put together, sometimes it can change what the performance actually looks like. So it's it's a tough place, right? For sure.
Yeah, yeah. It depends on so many. Like if you have an example, then we can talk about it. if it's just a general question, it's just so difficult to where do you even start?
One could say there's too many variables.
There you go.
There you go. All right, here another question for you here. This one's from Ron. Where do valid, error, and empty indicators come from? So I think I've seen a mention of it. Don't recall where.
So I think you're talking about these, and these are just view and then column quality. And I'll usually do column distribution. I'll rarely do column profile because then anything you click, this just pops up. It is useful sometimes, particularly because it's one of those that actually has a button, use the entire data set. But I think you were referring to these over here, and those are just column quality.
That's funny, but dude, you work exactly opposite for me. I turn off the column quality and distribution and say I'll leave column profile on. If I want to know the stats, I'll click on the column to see them rather than have it clutter up and take the space from the top. But Ron, if you don't see these settings on your view tab, the column quality, column distribution, this is in Office 365, I think, is the only place that those show up. I don't believe that they actually made the 2019 cut. So. The other question for you, Gašper, is are you going to be providing us a link to the slide deck and the example files that you used?
Yeah, I'm going to give the files to you, and then you can distribute them.
Fantastic. We will get those linked up on our on the site then. Awesome.